I got some copies of the report, and I've got copies of the minutes. I'm gonna suggest we approve them the next meeting instead of this
Yeah, I
one.
didn't get did we get the public minutes of the 26th?
Nope, we got them right.
Oh,
I got
okay.
'em now, yeah. All right, I'd like to call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order and ask that we begin the meeting by pledging allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. So I have copies of the minutes of April 24th and of April 26th, which was the public hearing. And I'm going to suggest that we postpone approving them till everybody's had a chance to read them. So I just passed out the April 24th meeting, and then I'm passing out the April 26th. And then our next meeting, we could vote to approve these next Monday.
Yep.
At our short meeting that we have before the town meeting. Give you a chance to read through them. They're both reviews of the warrants. One was the review with the selectmen, the joint meeting with the selectmen. And then the Wednesday meeting was the public hearing. So that's why they're so long, because it regurgitates the warrant. All right, so next on the agenda is the year-to-date reports.
So we have the minutes of April 10th.
Uh,
Everybody did get those.
Oh, okay.
And I'll make a motion to accept those.
All right, motion made to accept the minutes of April 10th. And seconded. Any discussion around the minutes? Hearing none. All in favor? Well, may do a voice vote. Mr. Reed?
Aye.
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 See, and the chair votes aye. All right.
You need a copy?
I've got one. I've got them all in my file. I spent some time today double checking to see if the minutes have been kept up with, to make sure that Brianna's been paid correctly for the minutes. So the next item are the year-to-date reports. And there's a couple things that were a little troublesome with the reports this year. If you look at the, if you've got a copy of your reports with you, if you look at the town reports, you'll notice that the headings at the top, original estimated revenue adjustment, it's the columns or the headings for the revenue report, not the expense report. The expense report would read the original appropriation, transfers, revised budget, if any, year-to-date expended, and encumbrances. You'll notice there are no encumbrances on the report this month. That's because
Or last month.
encumbrances doesn't exist in the world on the revenue reports. So I did stop in and talked with Deanna, who went into her report setup and found where she could change it. And so in the future, it'll come in back to the way it should be, with appropriations, expenditures, encumbrances, and balances. And it did throw it off if for instance, if you look at school in-town transportation, which was budgeted originally at $680,000, there was $60,000 that carried over from the previous year that was encumbered. So new estimate was, the new allocation is $740,000. They've spent $490,000, and if you look over at the remaining revenue, there's no remaining revenue. That's because it's all encumbered, and we didn't get the encumbered fund. So it's just to be aware that there will be a few things that you might be looking at that, in this particular report, that will be problematic. There were a couple things that I talked with Linda about the, on page 9 and 8. The cable TV studio, and, you know, it's got $17,000 under the cable studio, and very little of it's been spent. And on page 8, the $40,000 that was approved, it's under COMCOM articles and encumberment. That hasn't been spent either. So she said that, you know, they're doing extensive renovations to the equipment room here. And believes that, said that there's $30,000 or $40,000 worth of stuff that's been ordered at this point in time. And it may be no, if it were incumbent, it would show up as, it would change the amount that's left, and it's $40,000 unspent. So there was some question as to whether she thought it needed to be encumbered. It does. So she's going to take care of that. So there were a few of those things that popped out at me that, you know, where I've questioned a couple of times about the increase in the amount of money that the cable TV contract is going to bring to the town, which is great. And on the revenue side, that's one of the things that kind of caught my eye, that on the amount of money that the cable TV for the PEG program was, it's allocated $36,000, and we've only collected 18. But that's because it brought us to the next problem. If you look at the revenue report, and you look at last month's revenue report, they're identical. So I talked to Katie about that, and this is where the learning curve, I think, is taking place. She's been working with Joanne to get the revenues posted. So we've received a lot of revenues that don't show up on the report. If you look at the report this month, you know, the total amount of revenues amounts to about 60%. This time of year, we're usually at 85 to 90%. So looking at it quickly, some flags go up and say, we either got a big problem or something's not happening in a timely basis. And it is the posting of the new revenues, apparently, that is behind. So it's something that Katie's aware of, and she's working on it. But in the meantime, you need to look at the revenue reports and take them with a grain of salt, because they're not up to date.
I mean, the same is true with the enterprise fund revenues. They were all in the 70% range.
Yep.
So
Same thing.
that's a posting issue as well.
It's going to be a posting issue, because if you look at last month's enterprise revenue reports and this month's, they're identical.
Yeah.
So you know people are paying bills. Those revenues should be recognized. So they're not being recognized right now. And you're right, it sends that flag up that, you know, here we're doing really well with the enterprise funds this year, but I'm not seeing it on paper. And that's why. So that's just something we have to be aware of, keep an eye on. Hopefully, you know, I'll keep in touch with Katie, and when they get the revenues posted and updated, see if we get an extra report for everybody to take a look at. And Brian, I see you're here tonight. I've got a couple of questions about items that are in your bailiwick. One was the DPW highway materials, and for the committee, it's on page 23. I mean, there's a pretty healthy balance in that right now. It's at, I think there's $95,000 roughly.
That's because at Fall Town Meeting, they approved money.
I don't know if it's on.
Is this any better?
It's
Yeah.
not on.
Sound a little better.
That is better. I can hear myself.
Maybe
At,
that,
at Fall Town Meeting, they approved $95,000 for road paving.
Right.
And they put it into the highway materials budget. We paved Island Road. We put a level of course on that, but we're slated in the month of June to do Pleasant Street. So you're gonna see that line drastically drop, as well as the guys are out doing overlays on roads now. So I can guarantee you that will be pretty close to zero by the end.
Yeah, because I knew we had added that 95, and that's pretty much the balance right now.
Yep, so we used some last fall.
Plans for it.
Yeah, it's all going out for asphalt, whether we're shimming roads or doing Pleasant Street. And Pleasant Street's gonna be ground and a level will put on it, and then we'll address the rest with
With the next one.
the top with the fiscal '24 budget.
And then I had a couple questions on enterprise expenses. With the water, water meters. We were gonna buy water meters, we budgeted $10,000 for,
So we're still buying water meters out of ARPA. We said that we were gonna finish the system, and we're gonna be finishing the system. We just had the last shipment come in. We have about 800 meters remaining out of the 2,200. So we're trying to get into the residents to get them swapped out, but that 10,000 is actually gonna be a lifesaver this year, because the amount of water breaks that we had over the winter. So you'll see that 10,000 is gonna get, I'm gonna do a line item transfer over to system maintenance, which, if you look at the report, looks low. So that's gonna help us in that respect, because we didn't plan on having the amount of water breaks that we had over the winter.
okay, so, and the water meters, you bought the water meters, but used ARPA money for that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, we already have them. They're at the DPW, where as people call and we can schedule, we're getting them put in.
Okay. And then the, under the sewer, we budgeted $102,000 for chemicals. We haven't spent any of that.
So we have, Veolia is behind on their billing. Now that the contracts are in place, it's a lot easier for them to set us up in the computer. So you're gonna see that line item drop as well.
Okay.
Yep.
Because last year, we increased that. We got hit
We-
with
Yep, because of the price of chemical went up.
shortfall from what had been budgeted the year before, I want to say.
Yep, so you're gonna see that drop as well. I requested, last week from Veolia for them to get current with our bills, so that I'm not playing the game in the end of June and into July. I wanna get those bills in now and get them paid.
Right.
The, one thing that you're gonna see, and I've already notified the town manager's office and the accounting office, is the, transfer station enterprise. We're gonna be going over budget. That's because we're taking in more trash than we budgeted for. So, we'll have to address that out of retained earnings at fall town meeting. But, with the increase in costs for the trash companies that picked up at the residences, we've seen a huge influx in people coming in and buying transfer stickers and switching over to the town. So that's increased costs on our end. So, it's a good thing, but it's a bad thing because we didn't budget for it, because we didn't know we were gonna see this kind of influx.
So it's an increase in recycling expenses and
Yeah.
tipping fees?
It's more, you're not gonna see it on the recycling side, you're gonna see it more on the trash hauling side. And that's why, I've explained at other meetings why we're looking to purchase that roll-off truck so that we can better control our costs and haul full dumpsters rather than three-quarter full dumpsters and full compactors rather than half. And that's one way where we're gonna be able to drastically control our costs is with that truck. Because I don't believe it's worth hauling a dumpster that's three-quarters full. You wanna haul a full dumpster, because that's where your profit's at.
Yeah. And that would be, that expense would be what's called tipping fees?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Anybody else? I don't want to hog it.
The only thing I was concerned about when I read this was the fuel. Again, Council on Aging right now is negative $10,000, but it was only increased by $2,000 for next year's budget. The library heating is at 4,700, and they were increased by like 1,000 or something. It was even less. So we're going to have to watch that carefully next year,
Yeah.
because I don't suspect heating is going down at all. The fire department fuel is at 4,600. They got an $8,000 increase though, so they should be okay. Overtime is 21,000 though, at fire department.
Yeah, I think that get somewhat
course, snow and
balanced out
ice
with call firefighting. That line item is
You'll be seeing me in here next month for fuel as well.
was it?
You'll see me in here next month for fuel as well, for that separate account that we did.
Yeah,
Fuel is real low if we're not close to October right now. We just, this month's bill was actually surprisingly pretty good, which I was pleased with, but diesel fuel's still through the roof.
Yeah, it's vehicle fuel versus heating oil.
Yeah, so heating oil,
Everybody seemed to come in,
I think I was right around $1,000 over for the year for heating for the building,
Yeah.
which I didn't think was bad with the prices that we had.
$14.99, does that make sense?
Yep, over.
Yeah.
Yep. And I plan on coming in next month and asking for a bunch of transfers at the same time.
Or we're going to say no.
Okay.
But I look at the bottom, total of the budget is 79.6%, which is about where we are in the year, 80% of the year.
Yep.
And I look at the school, and, I mean, they had ton of line items that were in the negative, but again, their bottom line was 73% of their total, so I think they're in good shape.
yeah.
They can make the transfers.
I know they had the, is it spare custodians
Yeah,
that
yeah.
he explained to us as.
Right.
As a budgeting terminology, I think they had,
The subs and the custodian, those
Yeah.
two line items, but they have the money to
Yeah.
cover it, so they'll
Yeah.
be okay.
yeah, they're, as you said, their bottom line right now is 77%. Given that 85 to 90% of their budget is salary,
Right.
that's about where they ought to be.
I'm a little concerned, I guess, because we're getting close to year end, especially with the errors in revenues. So is there any chance that just those revenue reports could, say, be printed out on the Wednesday before our June meeting, and you could review them to see if they could be corrected before we have our meeting?
Yeah. At the very least, yeah. I mean, I'm hoping that they, you know,
Or even the week
they get the
before.
up-to-date, postings. And I don't know enough about accounting to know exactly what that process is. I know that, that a recommendation from the accountant, was to keep an eye on this because he had, early on in our recovery process,
Yeah,
that emphasized the importance of what's the term I'm looking for? Balancing out the revenues, and making sure that, postings were done
In a
and
timely fashion.
reconciled,
Yep.
that's the word I was looking for, and do the reconciliation on a monthly basis. And seems to me Tony commented, that there was some slippage in that,
That's
you
right.
know.
And if
And it
we're,
had to do with turnover, but it's something we really need to keep an eye on pretty closely.
and if we're at 60 days now, by next month, we'd be at 90 days if it isn't corrected. That's not acceptable.
Well, yeah, and I'm concerned that, you know, once the fiscal year ends and we need to get free cash certified.
Yep.
That if we've got postings that haven't been aren't up to date, that's gonna push back that process to the point where we might not have free cash certified before the fall town meeting,
That's
for
right.
instance. And,
Yeah. So we've got to keep on that.
yeah, and not to beat a dead horse, but, you know, there's a number of assumptions that's gone into the operating budget, and the warrant, based on assumptions that free cash will come in looking pretty good the way it has
Yeah.
in the past several years. And I think, personally, I think there's several factors that are up in the air a bit. So the revenue is a key right about now. That and the fact that, as Brian pointed out, we'll be getting together during the month of June to do budget transfers, so things balance out, and you gotta have a source of underfunded, underspent accounts to
Yeah.
move.
It's going to be close.
I think it's gonna be closer than it's been in the last several years, for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, there's a couple things that look like they could be accounts that were over budgeted. One of them being school choice, but now I'm thinking maybe the school choice just isn't getting reported
isn't
in
getting
on
Yep,
on
entered,
time,
so.
because it was at below 50%, and at 3/4 of the school year done, you would expect it to be more than 50%. All right, any other questions or comments about year-to-date reports? This is the time of the year where they get real interesting, because they tell you a lot more about how the year's gone than obviously they do in the beginning of the fiscal year.
Yeah, Tom,
Yeah.
I mean, you've talked a bit about the revenues and, you know, the challenge that we have right now to get the postings up to date. I mean, I went through all of these documents with an assumption that things would be up to date, so spent a lot of time for no good reason at this point.
Yeah.
Is there a way, if they're not going to be caught up, and I don't pretend to know what the challenges are there, could we at least get some information as to how far behind they are in postings, so that we can make some, you know, educated guess as to the information that we're looking at?
Yeah, or even a memo saying, you know, I haven't added, nothing's been added in
Exactly.
for the last month or so.
Sometimes that educated guess is hard, though, because we don't get monthly income, it could be quarterly. And
Yep.
so sometimes you're just not sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, I mean, even something like water user revenues, the water rate revenue, or the sewer rate revenue, it's the same this month as it was last month. Now, people paid bills,
Sure.
you know, so
Yeah.
it's at least a heads up to say it's not accurate. we're behind.
Right.
Just to give us a heads up, then you won't spend a lot of time looking at it, number one. And we know that we've got to keep an eye on it. I mean, we can't wait till June to see how they're doing. We need to, talk with the accountant and see how that's progressing. And if there's, if it's a problem that isn't resolved soon, then, we're gonna run up the flag. And, because it will have repercussions, on the free cash, for sure. All right, I think next on the agenda is the town meeting report. When we met a couple weeks ago, we had talked about a few themes for the Finance Committee report, and I think we had agreed that we'd kind of focus in on the free cash policy, particularly with the impact that the rising costs of snow and ice accounts has had, and the degree to which it's increased over the last few years. And then also looking at the post-employment OPEB payments that, again, have not been budgeted as part of the operating budget. And I know that the town manager's concerned that it's a big jump, and but to continue taking it out of free cash assumes that you always have free cash. So if you're taking out of free cash, you're basically paying it a year behind. Because, if you were putting it in the operating budget, then you wouldn't have that much free cash available. But it's the same amount of money that gets allocated, and if it's a cost to the town, it should be in the operating budget. Free cash should be used for one-time expenses, or expenses that are not reoccurring expenses. And OPEB is a reoccurring expense. So that was the second focus of it. I'll just walk through it. What I did first is I put a slide together just to show, refresh people what free cash is, what the policy is, particularly that the goal is to try to carry 5% in free cash.
I think you should spell out EOY, because people won't know what it is.
Yes.
And what was the percentage of free cash that you were proposing?
So what we're proposing, or what we've set up a policy for, is for the town to carry 5% of its operating budget as free cash. We've never hit 5%, but this past year, we've been at, well, as you can see, 5% would be about 1.6 million, and this year we had 1.2 million after spending $600,000 or $700,000 at the town meeting. So that's a pretty healthy balance. And you can see that the trends, I started FY19 because that was the first year that we didn't have to pay off the deficit loan that we got. So that's when we really started carrying over some free cash. Any questions about that slide? The next slide, I tried to illustrate what the problem, or not what the trend has been in the cost of snow and ice accounts. And if I got an extra one of these or not, Brian. Does everybody have one?
I'm not sure.
Do you guys have one? You want a hard copy?
Brian, you want?
I'm wait- Mr. Kane, when you talk about the rising costs of snow and ice accounts, could you maybe give some examples? Like the cost of the salt has doubled or tripled, Brian? You know, so that we're
Yeah.
not thinking it's just overtime or salaries or something.
Yeah, definitely, in presenting this, it's not a criticism of the overall cost. I mean, that needs to be explained, that the whole
Yeah.
thing with salt, moving away from sand by order of the state, the cost of salt going up.
This is product cost, and that's what they need to
Yeah,
understand.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that, we're really seeing different kind of winters, and
Yeah.
it's becoming a pattern. So some of it's got to do with global warming as well. But the point being that when we started this, again, back in FY '19, we had budgeted $210,000 for quite a while. It was break down to 150 for materials and 60 for overtime. And the actuals were, as you can see, there was, I think I get a typo there, 210, I think it should be 82. Yeah, 82,000. So we covered that in, balancing off the accounts at the end of the year. And then the next year, we budget the same amount, but the costs are starting to go up. So the shortfalls are 30,000 more, it's over 100,000. Next year is when we instituted the snow and ice reserve. And I don't think I want to get too far into explaining why we did that.
No,
But we all know that snow and ice account expenses is the one area in the budget that the town is allowed to overspend and put it off the next year, basically take out of next year's appropriation to pay it off. And if towns increase the allocation for snow and ice removal, the next year they can't decrease it. So Keith Hickey that came up with the idea of creating a reserve account, which will allow us to put more money into snow and ice without it being part of the snow and ice account. So that if for some reason we didn't need an extra $100,000, we could just make that reserve account less the next year. But of course so with that year, we added that $93,000. That's why it increased to $303,000. And it was effective that year. The overage was $57,000, even though the costs were another, $48,000 over the FY20. FY22, same thing. That's where we saw a big jump to $652,000. And that shortfall, that $350,000 shortfall, we did cover with, by making transfers at the end of the year. And I think most of that money was coming out of the special ed transportation account that was over budgeted for. And then this past year, right now, we're at $303,000. Expenses went up another $90,000. And the town manager doesn't think we'd be able to cover a $460,000 shortfall just from the accounts. So that's why he put on the warrant think it was $260,000 out of free cash. And obviously, the other 200,000, he's figured we can cover with accounts. So the reality is that the cost of snow and ice has grown exponentially. You could break it down, it's not because of more money being spent on overtime, it's more money being spent for materials. And the point here being that for next year's budget, there's an extra $22,000, but we can presume that the trend that we see in the actuals is going to continue. Could go up a little, could go down a little, but it's going to be much more than $325,000. So the message here is we need to account for the increased cost of snow and ice in the operating budget, not depending on free cash to cover that expense. And then just identifying the free cash warrant articles, just to point out that assuming they all three of them pass, that it'll leave a balance of $200,000 in free cash. Now, we would expect we get new free cash at the end of the year. Once it's certified by the state, then that number would increase by whatever amount of free cash is certified by the state. In the past few years, it's been between $1 and $2 million, but this year seems a little dicey, and we really don't know. I mean, hopefully we get a good, healthy amount, and we see that $200,000 increasing. But if it's a small amount, then we'll have moved, for the first time in the last 4 or 5 years, moved away from our goal of a healthy balance in our free cash account. And then the post-employment benefits, I know that this is a difficult one for the average voter to understand, but again, we're just kind of illustrating the fact that this too is an expense that is intended to be part of the operating budget, because it's something that we need to put away every year. And I think it's a mistake to depend on free cash every year. It may not be there. And then, and I understand the issue of adding a $100,000 expense to your operating budget when you're trying to make ends meet. But at the very least, there ought to be a plan to do it over a period of time. You know, if it's a 5% of the total cost of healthcare insurance, then that comes up to almost $120,000. Maybe you put 2% of that in the budget this year, and 3% comes out of free cash, and then the next year 2% more. You know, so you do it gradually. It'll probably be how we increase the operating cost of snow and ice removal. That, you know, if we're trying to reduce the overspending by a certain amount of money, then cover a third of it, and and a third the next year. But just not to do anything, I think, is a mistake. Certainly from a finance committee perspective. Any thoughts, questions?
I'm glad you're doing it.
Tom,
Yeah.
I have a concern on Article 23, the 450,000. I believe the discussion was that they were going to borrow money from the cannabis revenue to help offset the 450,000. But I noticed the cannabis revenue is still 107,000.
Right. See, and that, I don't know where, I don't know what the cannabis revenue is right now.
Well,
I
I'm
had the
afraid they're
same
gonna,
thing. As I looked at it, it says it's 107,000. Where's all this talk about $300,000-$400,000 coming from?
yeah.
But now I know that those revenues haven't been posted, so I haven't got a clean picture as to what the cannabis revenue, because you're right, that would give us a pretty good indicator as to whether or not it looks like we would generate that kind of free cash and not take it out of free cash. I mean, it's sort of, the way it's explained, the way I think Justin explains it, and I don't want to misrepresent him, but he perceives that that if we've got $300,000 in cannabis revenues this year, and then not part of what was the overall revenue, although you can't take that one source of revenue and separate it from the rest of it. The revenue is a revenue pie. When you begin the year and you say, okay, we're gonna get this much from this source, and this much from this source, this much, and it all comes up to the amount of money we need to run the town. One of those sources might come in less, another one might come in more. But you can't take cannabis and say, well, we can use that money for free cash. Maybe, if everything else comes in on target, then it is extra money, then it will certainly contribute to the certified free cash.
Yeah, I'm afraid it's gonna deplete the 200,000 left in free cash if the revenue's not there to cover it.
Well-
That's why those revenue sheets are critical, that we get them corrected.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one, the $550,000 for the paving plan is taking out of the amount of money that we have right now. So the free cash right now is,
1.3 mil?
1.2 million, somewhere right around there, right?
Yeah.
And that'll cover that expense, so that's $550,000. The rest of it's gotta be borrowed. The question is, will the free cash that's certified in the fall, at the end of the year, will that be enough to replenish what was taken out? As if we've committed $550,000 for, out of free cash for the paving, the question is, will there be $550,000 of new free cash to replace what we took out? And
We don't know.
Yeah,
we
I
don't
mean,
know.
that's my big
Nobody
concern,
knows.
is that they want the money out this year, but then pay it back over a 5-year period, which it's not a practical practice to do.
No, right.
You
And
don't borrow something and then pay it back.
All right, I mean, it's part of the revenue pie, like I said, it's part of the revenue pie. We don't know how big a piece it is. When he puts the pie together at the beginning of, developing a budget, he plugs in a number as to how big each piece is. But they don't come in exactly like that. Some come in a little over, some come in under. But you're right,
The 5-year,
why I kind of objected to that.
yeah, the 5-year borrowing is unpredictable. You don't
Well,
know
the
for sure.
5-year borrowing that's an approval by the town to borrow the money. So that's done and we
But-
pay it back over 5
But
years.
yeah, but where are you gonna borrow the money from? If
No,
the revenue's not there for,
Well, you wouldn't be borrowing it in that sense. I mean, just like the way we borrow money to buy a dump truck or a fire truck or, so your debt service is where that money gets budgeted. It's gotta be figured into the budget. I mean, it's not new money coming in. So if there's, $100,000 of a year of borrowing for the paving, then that's gonna get built into your debt schedule. And, the debt schedule is always in flux because some things are getting paid off, some things are just starting. But that would be not dependent on free cash at that point. That'd be dependent on the operating budget. So that, what really, the 550,000 is what's in play out of free cash, that article.
Yes.
For sure.
I have to just speak a little bit for the 550 out of free cash for our roads, because this past winter, it's not just the trees and the heating, it's the roads that took a beating as well. And if you drive around and take a look at them, and it takes an ambulance an extra 10 minutes to get to your house and an extra 10 minutes to get back onto a main road, that could be your life. And that's, I think, why they looked at these and said, we can't let it go. I mean, some of those roads, they're dreadful. And I don't want to be in the ambulances going down them, because it could add to the stress. And that's what I'm looking at. When I think the one time we need that 550,000 from free cash, it's not for something that's frivolous. I think it's really needed.
I have no problem with the roads being fixed at all. I'm all for that. It's just, we're on a very tight budget, and
Yeah.
I'm afraid that the funds might not be there.
Yeah. If it was just a few bumps, I would let it go, but when I look at it from the first responders, I'm going, yeah, that's not a few bumps, that could be a life.
Yeah. And again, I'm not questioning the need
No.
for the paving. For me, it's the timing. Where there's a lot of assumptions in that warrant article.
A lot of hopes.
And, I would say, wait till fall, when we know what we got for free cash,
Yeah.
and then you can make a better decision. But, that's just my opinion.
Mr. Kane,
Yes.
question just to back up a second on the snow and ice accounts, as you were speaking to them and using free cash to bring up the shortfall in other funds. My question is, looking at the budgets over those several years that are lined here against actuals, why is the budget, if you have the knowledge or information about it, raising the budget every year, fiscal year, to try to cover it, why is it so conservative? And I know with the 2 to 3 year span of time with COVID, material costs and things like that, you can see that the actuals more than doubled.
Yeah.
But the actuals far exceeded the budget request.
Yeah.
Why are the budgets so
Well,
conservative, based on the little history you have here?
Right. Well, and that's, I guess, the key point that we're saying. Is that they've done two things, one thing really, over the course of those last 4 or 5 years.
Right.
Added $93,000 by putting it in the reserve account. Bumped up from FY '20 to '21 to 210 to 303. And was maintaining, in doing that, there's always a shortfall, but not enough shortfall that we had to end the year in a deficit and take it out of the next year's taxes.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
Certainly last year really was FY '22. I'd say that was the first year, Brian, that we really got whacked with a major increase in the
Yeah.
materials
Yeah,
line
yeah,
item.
I see that.
And frankly, we did argue with the town manager to find some way to increase that, because, now, I will say this, that, by the time we were dealing with that shortfall, it was this time of year, budgets were put to bed, and it was the first year, I guess you could say, of a trend, although when you add in the $90,000 in FY '21, the shortfall was really $150,000. So that trend of increase, it started that. But it's, that's what, that's what we're arguing for right here, is to say that that's a real expense. It's not an unusual year. It's not as though we got hit with 4 or 5 blizzards, and that's where the expense came from. It came in a pretty mild year, and it came in the cost of salt. And what's changed is the amount of times that they have to go out and salt the roads has actually increased, even though we've had fewer snowstorms and fewer severe weather issues.
Yeah, Mr. Croto had explained that earlier.
It's just
yeah.
the overnight. But, I mean, that's the question, is that we're saying, you gotta put more money into snow and ice. You know, whether
Yeah.
they do it creatively and add it to the reserve account, make the reserve account $200,000, $300,000. I mean, to me, you know, unless there's something that's gonna dramatically change the cost of salt, I don't see these numbers, the expense going down.
Mhm.
So it's a question of where's it gonna come from? And, you know, and the town manager's saying, I can't increase that by $300,000 because I have to take that from somewhere else. And our argument, I guess, would be, well, do it over a period of time, but we're gonna do it, because otherwise it's just takes free cash. And it takes, the certified free cash at the end of the year is what the state says is the difference between what we collected and what we paid out. But when we move things around to cover shortfalls in different accounts, that's potential free cash that we're using to balance off accounts. And, you know, the expectation is something's off by a few $100s or a couple $1,000s, that's what that's for. But when you're covering $100,000, $400,000 deficit, that's not the intention of the end of the year balancing. You know, then you're using, you know, that $200,000 that will cover up what we didn't cover in the warrant article. If we didn't have to use that to cover snow and ice, it'd be free cash come fall. That help?
Mhm.
Okay. Brian, you good?
The easiest way to explain this, in 2020 and 2021, salt prices were about $54 a ton. In '22, salt jumped to $74 a ton, and this year in fiscal '23, salt was $84 a ton.
Yep.
So you're talking a $30 difference, and we are under state contracts, we are getting the best price we can possibly get, so, a $30 swing over, you know, 3 years is costly, and then you add fuel and,
Yeah.
parts and everything else, it's a lot. What my recommendation, and it's just my recommendation, is not to increase the line item for snow and ice, but to increase the reserve amount, because then it doesn't lock us in, and it makes it so that if we do need to request it, it's there, but it doesn't tie our hands because of the state law with snow and ice. So I'd rather see the 93,000 reserve go up. So if we did need to do something with it, it's not, the hands aren't tied, and if winters change and they get lighter, we don't have a snow and ice account at $500,000 that we can't move because of state law. State law doesn't say that we can't reduce the reserve amount. That's my understanding, at least.
Right. Yeah, that's my understanding too, and that's another way of doing it, is just put more money in the reserve. I mean, whether allocated on the line item or allocated in the snow and ice reserve account, the key is we gotta allocate more money.
Yeah, because I don't see a change coming with the reduction in salt. Usually once something goes up,
Yeah.
it's very far and few between before it drops.
Right.
I mean, it might come down, but, you know, we're at a point where we're at $460,000 this year.
Yeah.
We did make some other changes this year to try to head off some of the larger costs. In one of the capital line items, we asked for a transmission for the truck. We needed 4 new loader tires on the older loader, and we needed a conversion kit for one of the other trucks, and we asked for that outside of the budget. These are all a result of snow and ice, but it doesn't makes sense to me to keep hitting that account. If we see that it's coming, we should ask for it outside of snow and ice, so that when we have a snow and ice number, it's snow and ice. So it's just a little bit of a change, but I think in the long run, it's more transparent. You know, the need's always gonna be there and things are gonna happen, but if we can see some of this coming down, I think we need to react then like we're trying to do this year.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd agree. I guess my point is that I understand the part of you can raise the account, the amount of money that you allocate for snow and ice, but you can't decrease it from one year to the next. But we're so far away from the $300,000 is so far away from $200,000, because I mean, we got the 93 in there.
Right.
So let's call it $200,000 is so far away from reality
Yes.
that I think it's good finance to have that number closer to
Yep.
reality. Some point where we would say, you know what, it's never gonna be below $500,000.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's never gonna be below $400,000. So set that as a target and bump up the allocation, you know, one year by 100,000, and the next year 100,000, so you can just gradually build it up. And we'll always run a shortfall.
Yeah.
Because you know, that's understood, but if it's a manageable shortfall, predictable shortfall, then, you know, that, I think, is a decent goal.
It's just tough because none of us sitting here can predict what we're getting next year. If we could, it'd be a lot easier. But, you know, it could get better or it could get worse like this winter. It's just
Yeah.
unknown.
I mean, if prices, let's assume prices settle down, not so much decrease, as you point out. They don't decrease very often, but just level off. Then we've got more of a predictable history to plan our budgeting on.
Absolutely.
And I think the one thing I'm trying to illustrate is, it's never going back to $200,000.
I don't see that happening, no.
No. And essentially, that's what's still in our operating, the line items, 150 and 60. I think we bumped them up this year by $20,000 or something. So that's the point. And obviously, it's not going to impact this year's budget, but the goal here is to kind of get the word out to say, that's just not good financial practice.
I agree.
And, you know, we hit the year where we haven't got the free cash, then we got a problem.
Yeah, big problem.
Yeah,
Because it cuts into the following year's budget.
Mm-hmm.
It comes in, if we can't fund it out of free cash, it's gonna come out of the following year's
right.
snow and ice budget, so you're
Comes out
starting
of the
that.
next year's budget, right. So it
Right.
reduces the next year's budget by whatever amount we're over.
Yep.
If we can't cover it with free cash. So one way or another, it gets budgeted, that's the point.
Yep.
You know, you fall into next year with,
Can I say one more thing and I'll
Make
let it go? So we're already 200 for the shortfall on the snow and ice. That's gonna come from revenues from other sources.
well, for snow and ice, the town manager believes that we'll be able to cover 200,000 of the shortfall.
And so,
With transfers within the FY '23 budget.
so Article 23 is based on that, is shortfalls.
Yeah, FY '20,
That's 450K plus the 200K. So they're gonna be looking for 650,000 shortfall for the year.
for,
To-
Oh,
To
no.
cover,
Oh.
to cover that
oh,
article
for
and to
snow,
cover.
for snow and ice?
Well, no, plus the Article 23. Because they're gonna, that's what they're using the,
That's included, so the number that's in the warrant article for the 200 and something thousand, that's part of the deficit, so that's the max that the town manager's asking to come out of free cash.
the 260.
Yep, if he can do more, out of transfers, he's gonna do more so that money remains in the free cash. That's the max. That's the way I understand it.
Right. But my point to him is that if you, let's say he's planning, he can do 200,000.
Yeah.
Right? That's 200,000 that would have been free cash.
Correct.
So if he can do 300,000, that's 300,000 that would have been free cash.
Yes.
It's,
It's the same thing.
it's potential, right, this is the time of year where we start looking at what's potential free cash and what's actual free cash, and that's your potential for next year.
Yep.
The more that you use of your overages this year to balance the budget, then the less potential, or the more potential free cash you've used, and the less actual will be there.
So the way I understand it is, we wanna leave as much of the certified free cash as we can alone and do a budget transfer, because because the 260, which he asked for, is already certified.
Yes.
So if we can do more on other items, that's not certified free cash yet.
Right.
Certified free cash is very, very key.
Yeah, and the intent of certified free cash is what's left over at the end of the year. You know, when you take your expenses and you take your revenues and, you know, hopefully the revenues cover the expenses, and if there's a little more revenue than there were expenses, that becomes certified as free cash. And it's sort of like your savings account. And that's where we use free cash typically for non-recurring expenses, you know, the new dump truck or fire truck or, you know, capital expenses. You know, in the last few years, you know, we've, I think, made our plea pretty loud, consistent, that shouldn't be used for water rates, shouldn't be used for sewer rates, you know, shouldn't be used for things that should be paid for out of other resources, typically the town revenue package. All right. Thanks, Brian. So, any questions or thoughts? So I'm gonna run with this tomorrow, make a couple of edits and get it down to town manager's office tomorrow morning.
Okay.
All right,
So can I just make one
sure.
No,
comment? Talking about the other post-employment benefits, and I know you've covered it already. The longer we assume that we can cover those expenses from free cash, the more at risk that program is in being successful. And if there is any way, as you already said, to make it a line item in the budget, rather than hoping that there's free cash available, I mean, you know, in these, at some point, we're not going to have free cash.
Right.
Just not as available as it's been the last 2 or 3 years. And it's an expense, really, it's an expense that's already been incurred, just hasn't been paid yet.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
mean, if we have an increase in workers' comp, we have to budget for it. If we have an increase in salaries, we have to budget for it. Other post-employment benefits, we have to budget for it. I don't think, you know, we're really putting the town at risk, not we, but the town is at risk if that's not a permanent part of the budget.
Right. Absolutely, Doug.
but I think we could push that, like, not after Christmas, but October, November, to put that line item in the next year's budget. Even if we did 30,000 and took the rest out of free cash, and then the following year, 40,000 and took, until you have something sustainable in there.
Because it's a reoccurring cost.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a reoccurring cost that we have paid out of our savings. And that assumes that you'll always have extra money in your savings. Well, if you always have extra money in your savings, put it in the budget. It's a budget item.
Right.
All right. Guess we've beaten that horse now.
The horse died.
All right. The member comments, just to let you know, I had gone to the Association of Town Finance Committee Conference the end of week ago, last Saturday, I guess it was. And they focused in on grants, all kinds of grants. I mean, they did an overview of the state budget, which is still being debated, and it's obviously, it's a budget that the town has a lot of interest in, because 50% of our revenues comes from the state. Most of it in Chapter 70, but there's also the aid to cities and towns and several other smaller libraries, veterans services that we get from the state. So it's something that we should be keeping an eye on in terms of what the trends are. Right now, the report that we got at that meeting was that it's certainly, for the third year in a row now, some healthy increases in school aids, various special education funding programs, circuit breaker, things of that nature. And the increase, they did talk about the increase in the overall net school spending and the increase in Chapter 70 money, and the corresponding increase in local towns' contribution to that increased net school spending. And there is some legislation to address the problems that it creates for some towns, particularly towns like ours. What the budget recommends this year is to basically close the gap a little closer to the net school spending, that you can do once, and that's it. We've had about $350,000 over the minimum net school spending. That minimum's gone up a lot, so that difference is about $50,000 now. So hopefully there's some legislation that might address the needs of communities like Winchendon. The other thing they talked a lot about was federal grants and just the process of applying for grants, and what towns should be doing to put themselves in a position, particularly for competitive grants. There are some strategies that we've been using, the idea of trying to putting some money into capital planning, specifically for pre-planning drawings and things of that nature that are usually required when you're put in for state funding. Had me wondering a little bit about the wisdom of eliminating the community planner position. When Tracy Murphy left, we haven't been able to fill it. So I know the town manager has done a reorganization to try to fill some of the gaps and have the town manager take on some of the responsibilities there. And if anything, the presentation just sort of emphasized the importance of having somebody good, even if you need to use a consultant, but if you don't budget it one way or another, it can be very daunting to fill out those applications for grants. So had me wondering if we're maybe second guessing a little bit about the reorganization, but we'll have to see how it works. And then we all got a mail yesterday or today from Justin, I think it was today, about the ARPA fund, some recommendations to the ARPA fund expenditures. Brian, I don't know if you wanted to speak to that, the ARPA fund memo that we got from Justin today?
That was my primary purpose for being here. So last night, I made a presentation with the town manager to the Board of Selectmen. We had proposed 5 new projects. The first project is the $500,000 towards the application for the water line from the plant to the town line. The second project is the match for the $500,000 that we received from the federal government. That water line piece is from the top of Maple Street to Jackson Ave. That completes that 10-inch line and upgrades it to the 12, so it's a new line from the beginning of Central Street all the way to the tank, because from Jackson Ave to the current water take on Elmwood Hill, that was upgraded during one of the tank upgrades, but they never brought it down low enough. We were lucky enough to have the $500,000 allocated through Senator Trahan's office. But as part of that grant, there was a match from the town, so the $100,000 for that would come out of ARPA. The third item is the asset management.
On the second item,
Yep,
that's not gonna require digging up Main Street again, is it?
no. So when we did Central Street, I extended the water line from in front of the CVS driveway or the church that's right there. We extended it from there to the other side of Maple Extension, so that we wouldn't have to dig that back up. I didn't want to dig that twice and repave that twice, so we made sure that happened last year. So the only piece we're doing is from the other side of Maple Extension to Jackson Ave, and then the houses that are in those sections are getting connected off. They'll get a new branch line onto North Street, and then we'll connect in on Jackson Ave. If the bids come in correctly, we'll have a little bit of it, we should have some extra money left over. When they laid the water line from Jackson Ave to the tank, they left the old 6-inch line in place, so you're running two water lines up that small section from Jackson Ave to Broadview. So my goal would be to do away with that 6-inch line and just connect the houses into the 12 that's there. So I believe there's enough funding here, but we won't know that till we go out to bid. So I'll do that small portion as an add-alt on the contract. But the goal would be to get rid of the 6 and the 12 that are side by side. So that project's been a long time coming, because that's gonna level out the water pressures, provide better water, and that's the whole goal here, is to have quality drinking water.
Thanks.
Yep. The third one is the asset management grant. That's the last warrant article. We received the grant from the state. With that came a small match. I believe the total for that grant was $137,000-ish. Some of it is in-kind hours from myself, the town manager, my staff, and then there's a small piece that we had to fund for the $39,250. So we took that out of the ARPA, or we allocated out of ARPA. The fourth item is, if you go up and down Central Street, you'll see there's small gaps in between the curb and the sidewalk. Originally, we were hoping that the state would pick up the cost of the plantings, but it doesn't look like that's happening. And we went out for some pricing, and it was astronomical. I would never bite on it, because it's way too much money. So me and the town manager proposed that we just go out, buy the plant stock in-house, install it in-house, probably take us a couple days to get it done, and then save a considerable amount of money. We asked for $25,000, and I know I can get it done for that. So that's a lot cheaper than what was proposed. The last item is the Front Street Bridge, which is below us right here. It's down to one lane. There's about a basketball-sized hole underneath the plate that's there. The whole goal for that is for us to have the engineers come in, see what's going on, see what we need to do for a repair, and have a bid-ready spec, because I can't go grant searching or asking the delegation to get us money to repair this bridge if we don't know what the issue is. If the whole bridge needs to be replaced, and that's a game changer. But if we can do a repair like we did in, I believe, 2018-ish, that would be optimal, and then we know exactly where we need to be. So those 5 projects were put out. We wanted to make sure that the $500,000 was allocated for the water line, because that's gonna put a big dent in the number to replace that line.
What's the balance after those projects?
So the balance is $161,607.37. And that money needs to be expended by the end of next summer.
Yeah, yeah.
So it still gives us, a little nest egg to sit on, but it's taking five projects that aren't wishes, but, priorities. It's kind of crazy to turn away $500,000 from the federal government when we're putting $100,000 in, not even of town money, of other grant money. So that's savings straight up.
Yeah. Questions for Brian? Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
All right. Any other member comments?
Yes. I propose a change to our agenda. After the approval of minutes, I would like number 2 to be a chair report. Just to update the committee, I know you meet with the superintendent, the town manager, and various other folks, just to let us know what's going on. Number 3, to be committee reports. I know we have the audit, capital plan, and the fire committee right now. As a review, if nothing's happening, okay. I know last year we had an issue, the audit committee wasn't meeting on a regular basis, and so we were kind of delayed getting our information this past spring to do our budgets, and that's not good. And the fire station, like it's coming up in the fall, just keep us apprised of what they're discussing, what's going on, what's happening, and then go to year-to-date's town meeting would be 4, 5, 6, and 7. And there's, the only 3 I could think of was audit, capital plan, and fire. Are there others?
The only other what?
Committees that we represent.
Yeah, I mean, there was the ad hoc committee for revenue sharing, that really wasn't about revenue sharing so much as
Is
it
that
was
still going?
personnel sharing. No, that's done.
Okay.
So, yeah, capital,
And the
Fire.
one you were on, Adrian,
Audit.
is done for now, right?
No,
Oh, they're still going?
we have a meeting tomorrow
Okay,
to
so we
discuss
better,
Okay.
future, so,
yeah,
so,
there's the CPA.
yeah, the
CPA, so we better add CPA.
I think that'd be a good idea.
Yeah,
Uh,
just so we all sort of know,
Yeah.
because sometimes somebody's away and we miss 2 or 3 months, and then all of a sudden something happens and we go, really?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and if there's something I've got questions about, I try to meet with the town manager or the accountant ahead of time and get some answers to questions. So
Well, I
those are
think
things that
Sometimes we forget
would make
too.
sense in the
Yeah.
report.
If you meet with them 3 weeks before our meeting, by the time our meeting comes, sometimes you forget because you think it's taken care of,
Yeah.
but we don't.
Well, that's the other piece of it.
We
is
don't
A lot of
know it.
times they forget the answer, so well, I don't need to bring that up just to, just to say, look what I learned. But I think it's a good point. I mean, I think we all learn from, if James brings us up to date on what's going on with the fire department, and, Doug gives us input on the meetings for CPA, for the capital planning. Yeah,
And if
I
you
think it'd be a
just
good
took little
idea.
notes when you're there and say, okay, so what's my report gonna
Yeah.
be? We're less likely to forget something.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about that, any discussion? We'll take a motion to,
I'll make a motion that, what I just said.
Second item, article would always be the chair report, third article will always be the committee report.
Yeah.
And then we'll move on to year-to-dates and whatever other business we've got for that particular meeting. All right, so take a vote. James?
Aye.
Yep, Anthony?
Aye.
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 The chair votes aye. Okay. Yeah, I think
I'll make a
clearly, the
motion.
more informed we are, I said, the more informed we are, the better.
I think it is,
You know,
yeah.
the better the committee is.
Especially this year, I noticed when you were away, I was like, where do we go? So that sort of brought it home to me that we need to share a little more.
Yeah.
We all get kind of comfortable, so.
Yep.
I'll make a motion to adjourn at 7:40. Is that where we are? 7:50.
Right, motion to adjourn, here a second.
I'll second.
Seconded, all in favor, say aye.
Aye?
Aye.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. See you all next.